There we go. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Disaster Preparedness and Economic Resilience, Key Considerations for EDDs. I'm Brett Schwartz, an Associate Director at the NADO Research Foundation. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dion Thompson-Davily, behind the scenes, who's helping us with logistics. Thanks so much for being here at our session. I know I say this often, but really appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedules for some additional training and support. I know there's a lot going on these days, so thanks so much for your interest. We've got a great presentation today coming your way from David Dodd, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But before that, I just want to share a few opening remarks. So today's session is offered through the Economic Development District Community of Practice, or the EDD COP. This is a 5-year program funded through a cooperative agreement from the U.S. Economic Development Administration. And through the COP, we've been offering a wide variety of programming to support all of you at EDDs on the wide-ranging work that all of you do in service to your regions. So a quick disclaimer, of course, at the bottom here, the ideas offered today are those of our speakers and don't necessarily reflect the views of EDA or the Department of Commerce. So here's just a quick sampling of some of the written resources that we've been offering, as well as some virtual opportunities through the community of practice. You can see webinars, reports, issue briefs, case studies, and much more on a range of topics related to workforce development, the SEDS, hazard mitigation, federal grant administration, all these things that take up your days and nights likely at economic development districts. So I hope you've been able to keep an eye on some of these resources that we've been offering. They're all archived on our website at nado.org/EDDCOP. Also want to encourage you to head over to SED Central, which is our free clearinghouse of all information related to the SEDS. And we've got a special section there, of course, on resilience. And there you'll find videos, case studies, webinars, and much more, including kind of Resilience 101 section, sections on economic recovery, diversification, and more. So SED Central continues to be updated, as well as our EDD COP website. So stay tuned for more resources coming your way on SED Central. So when we launched the community of practice, we asked staff at EDDs to offer some words that describe the work and impact of their organizations. And we wanted to kind of generate a word cloud, which you see up on the screen here. And so I think, when you see words like collaborative, regional, innovative, responsive, effective, I think that really captures the spirit of the work that all of you do at districts. And as you'll hear on our presentation today, these are qualities and characteristics that are just so important when planning for disasters and strengthening regional resilience. So simply put, EDDs are well positioned for this really important and timely work. And really at the foundation of all this work are partnerships and relationships. Years ago, I was speaking with a colleague who works on earthquake preparedness up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And he said to me, don't exchange business cards on the battlefield. And that comment really stayed with me over 10 years later. And it's a good reminder, I think, to constantly continue to foster and nurture these partnerships so that you know who to call and who to trust, when you're really in the thick of it. You'll want a full Rolodex of organizations and people you can trust. And EDDs, by their nature, are convening organizations, again, which really kind of demonstrates the important role for you and your organizations in disaster recovery. So that was something that stuck with me for quite a while. As we get closer to David's presentation, just want to flag for Thursday. I know many of you have also signed up. We're going to be doing virtual office hours, which will be kind of a real open forum to really kind of ask some questions of David, share some challenges you're having, things that you're working on, kind of a real free-form blank canvas to work with. So we'll have some time today for some Q&A at the end of the presentation, but really to kind of dive in and have a conversation and connect with your peers. That's on Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. I think Dion's going to be dropping in that link into the chat to register. And again, just to open a forum for us to share and learn from each other and really support each other with this important work. Again, as always, if you're not signed up for NATO News, make sure to do that. That comes out every Thursday with just the latest and greatest on everything happening in the world of regional economic development and planning. There's a special dedicated section for all the work that we're doing through the community of practice as well. So sign up for NATO News and stay informed on upcoming events, resources, and much more from NATO and our partner organizations. So that's really it from me. Hope you can stay in touch. Again, there'll be a short survey after today's session to give us some feedback, but reach out at any time. We're really here for you to support your work. That's really the kind of the beauty of this community of practice, is building connections and partnerships. And it's probably my favorite part of this job is making connections amongst the group to be able to learn from each other. So reach out. Again, if you have any questions on anything or looking for additional resources, that's what we're here for. So yeah, excited to get to our main presenter today, and that is David Dodd. He is the founding president and CEO of the International Sustainable Resilience Center. He's based in New Orleans, and you'll hear much more about David's journey in a moment, but in brief, he began his career in disaster recovery and resilience during Hurricane Katrina. Since then, he's worked throughout the country and across the world on increasing capacity for economic resilience for all types of disasters. David has developed a focus on how well regional economies resist and recover from unforeseen events, and has collaborated with regional organizations, including economic development districts, for over 25 years, and really understands the unique challenges you all face in implementing regional economic resilience. So again, encourage you to ask some questions in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of those at the end, and join David, of course, on Thursday for our office hours. But with that, David, again, looking forward to your presentation. I know Mardi Gras is happening literally outside your door right now.
Yes.
Down in New Orleans. So thanks for taking a few minutes today to join us. With that, again, looking forward to your remarks, and I'll turn things over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Brett. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to some of my fellow EDD people. Uh, that's what we used to call it, as you know. And I was very closely associated with an EDD for about 20 years, and then I've worked with some others. We actually wrote the SEDS and had it approved for the first EDD in Puerto Rico. And as you remember, Brett, I spoke at the annual training session, and there was someone there from that EDD, so it was great to see that happen. As Brett said, I've been in disaster preparedness since Katrina. Helped with the recovery after Katrina, working on behalf of the State Department of Economic Development, worked with several planning and development districts, both in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, in that process. And really, the thing that I was really happy to hear when EDA decided that this should be a critical component of the SEDS, because this is really a regional approach is really the by far the best approach in looking at disasters. As you know, they don't go block by block. They happen, and they often take up large parts of a region or more than one region. So it's really important, I think, for all of you guys to know what disaster preparedness and economic resilience really mean. And we'll start with that, and then go into discussion about how this interacts with your organization and the importance of it, and some tips about how to make your region, your service territory more ready. Being ready is the big thing. So, economic resilience is the ability of a community's business and economic development efforts to better withstand, recover more quickly from adverse incidents of any kind. And incidents include natural disasters, man made disasters. I was very involved in the recovery from the BP oil spill, if you remember that. And they also include pandemics, as we all had to learn, and economic upheavals. That is a form of a disaster. It's anything that disrupts the normal flow of commerce is considered to be a disaster. And of course, we know that things like terrorism and armed conflict, we think those are a long way away, but especially acts of terror, the people in 9/11 didn't think they were too far away. Resilience includes response, recovery, and risk mitigation. So it is really all encompassing in those areas. And our emergency responders are, extremely valuable to us. If you aren't already working with your local or regional or state emergency management people, you need to be doing that. And that's the person you don't want to exchange a business card with after the disaster. So I think that it's really critically important. And Brett, you mentioned it. Uh, Relationships are the foundation for any successful effort, and they are especially important when disaster hits. And you want to have those relationships solidified before there's a chance even of a disaster occurring in your service territory. So that's really the foundation under which we're going to be discussing the rest of today. Okay, Brett. So mastering the said resilience component, as you probably all know, you've seen the guidelines. They put a lot of emphasis on resilience, and with good reason. So what SEDS does is it integrates resilience into the regional planning to ensure economic durability. Focuses on steady state, and steady state is a term often used, and what it means is that nothing is happening. There's no disaster occurring, and that's when you really want to put things into place, not when the disaster happens. You want to have everything set to be able to respond and recover after any adverse event. And the technical term is hazards. It's what people in the field in that field say is hazards. And you absolutely want response initiatives so you can have a resilient recovery. And that term was first coined in about 2014, and it led to the federal response organization FEMA integrating resilience into its recovery efforts, and that's commonplace now. So you always want to look at, okay, we've had a disaster. We need to recover. We need, facilities. We need infrastructure repaired. But in the process of doing that, let's make it stronger. Let's build it back better. And again, vital for regions looking at natural disasters, man-made disasters, economic shifts, infrastructure challenges, the infrastructure gap, and that's the gap between what is needed for resilience in infrastructure worldwide and what is being invested. It was $127 billion in 2023. By 2030, they project if more investment is not made, they project that gap will be 240 billion. That's a year. So every 5 years, you're looking at $1 trillion that would need to be invested if we don't start doing it now. It's the old saying, you can pay me now or pay me later. Well, I'd rather pay now. And really, regions facing these challenges, again, all types of things, conflict, potential economic shocks. We're seeing some of that happen today with the implementation of some of the tariffs, and that's going to continue. So we have to be ready. We have to be ready to respond. We have to be ready to take action to ensure that our economies remain strong. Okay, next slide. So the way you do this is a three-pronged approach. First, you have to plan for resilience. Just like your SEDS does your planning for your entire organization, you have to have that section in resilience really, really well thought out. And you have to have things that are achievable, that are aggressive, yes, but they have to be achievable. And so identifying your economic vulnerabilities. Do you have a high concentration in one or more industry? What's happening in that industry? Do you have like my hometown, we had two firms that basically provided about 80% of the employment in the town, and they left. And the town almost went away. So you have to identify those things, and you have to think ahead and think, okay, how can we be durable over the long term? Let's not look out a year. Let's look out 5 years or 10 years. And the next thing is, again, as I already said, establishing information networks. And one of the first things I do is tell EDDs, you need to have an economic resilience committee. You need to have a group that is called together to identify these vulnerabilities, to come up with solutions to mitigate those, and that needs to be ongoing. And I would strongly encourage every one of you to, if you haven't already, establish a resilience task force that could be, again, meeting on a permanent basis to be ready no matter what comes. And creating resilient recovery is really, really dependent upon stakeholder engagement, upon your both your elected officials, but your business leadership, your organizations in your region. They all need to be working together. And embedded strategies through collaboration with private, nonprofit, local, state, and federal organizations. Everyone needs to be at the table. Next. So here are the steps. And I could give you an hour's worth of discussion on each one of those steps because they're so important and they're not always just easy to click off. Of course, organizing, I've already said that. Assessing, doing a resilience assessment. The good news is that there are organizations that have done that. And of course, we don't know what's going to be with us for a long time and what's not in this changing environment. But right now, the Census Department uh, has a resilience ranking for every county in the United States. So you can go and find out where your county ranks as far as vulnerability. A lot of that is some of it's economic, but a lot of it is your socioeconomic standing. What are the income levels, education levels of the citizens? How is the government the local government organized? Those are all critical issues. Uh, but you need to do a comprehensive assessment and see how resilient you are, based on the factors that we are discussing right now. Then, identify the shortcomings, uh, do some research. There's so much information out there now on resilience, on economic resilience. I mean, it's almost overwhelming. But if you focus on the information that is of best and highest use for you, that can help you determine where you need to be looking as far as identifying resources, bringing new resources in if you need them, and then looking at the resources. Is and it may be tougher than it used to be, but we still have to find resources. The philanthropic community is really stepping up in terms of being more engaged in looking at not just climate mitigation, but climate adaptation, and looking at especially what it takes for communities to be resilient and helping them, not just with money, but also with programs and educational programs that are really, some of them are really great. And there are several places you can subscribe to fairly inexpensively. There are several places that have large databases of private philanthropic organizations. And I would really encourage all of you to become familiar with the philanthropic organizations that are engaged in disaster preparedness. And then, looking at how you take action, you break it down, you break these elements down into manageable steps, and you put one step in front of the other. And that's the difference between between a plan and an action. An action plan is just that. It's a plan for taking action. It's not a plan to be sitting on a shelf. And we all know the importance of continually uh, working off of the outlines that you put together for your 5 years to ensure that you're staying up, that you're following the course. That is so, so important. And especially again, in the work that you guys do, which is so critical at the regional level. It's so very important. Okay, next. So look at your economic challenges. Do you have, are you a one industry region, or do you have a variety of industries, a variety of different sectors represented that are in areas that are looking at growth? And workforce education gaps, that is a critical element in resilience, because if your workforce is not up to speed, and change is so rapid now, we all know that technological change is going at a breakneck speed, and we have to keep up with that. Our workers have to keep up with that, because it could very easily go south for us if we don't do that. And then infrastructure deficiencies. Broadband's a major issue, of course, and has been for a number of years, and probably will be for a number of years. It's certainly getting better, but we still need that communication infrastructure to be able to function. But it's more than that. It's the old-fashioned stuff. It's roads. It's bridges. The things that get people and goods to from one place to another. We have to look at all of that when we're considering vulnerabilities. And certainly, we know that in a lot of places in the U.S., roads and bridges are in pretty sad state, and we have to focus on how we can get the resources we need to invest in making those transportation routes, communication, electricity, all of that has to be more and more resilient. And it's not going away. We have to focus on this on a daily basis. And recognizing the weak points helps to mitigate risk. So if you recognize that you have deficiencies and you are taking action to correct those deficiencies, that's going to help you become more resilient. As I say, increasing your resilience capacity. And that is such a critical thing that is now front and center in everyone's mind. Next. So early warning is really, really critical. Focusing on the event, whatever that event may be, that hazard, and looking at how you can establish a network of communication so that people are warned, they're given information, they're told where they can go for help. Those are all so critically important, not just for the citizens of your region, but for the economy of your region. And so, again, collaboration with emergency management agencies. Many areas have business emergency operations center. We can talk about that in a lot of detail in the office hours if you'd like to. These have been established and are very successful at ensuring that the business community knows exactly what's going on, because often, they're busy running the business. They don't know that something is about to happen that could really disrupt their business. So keeping them informed, and that's all BEOC really is. It's a place where communication, robust communication, is constantly utilized, dealing with these disruptions. So you really want to have your business community prepared. And we're going to talk about a couple of things in that respect further on in the presentation. Next slide. So flexibility is absolutely critical in times of disruption and disaster. The one thing that we all that are involved in disaster recovery, and I've done about 20 major disasters in the last 19 years, some here, some overseas, but there's one thing that's true everywhere. There's a saying, it's called the Valley of Death. And what often happens when a disaster occurs, especially a major disaster, weather related or not, is businesses that are affected often do not have, especially your small and medium sized businesses, do not have the resources to absorb that shock. And many of them, the sad fact is, according to FEMA, 40% of the businesses in a major disaster will fail within 3 years. They may make it through the initial shock. Many of them don't. But there's this valley that occurs between the time that the disaster happens and federal and state assistance, financial assistance is available. We have the SBA has a disaster loan program, but it takes a long time. And so an ideal thing for you to do would be for your region to have an emergency fund. And often these businesses don't need a tremendous amount of money. 10 or 15,000 can make the difference between life and death for these businesses. And so my example is, to me, one of the best is Joplin, Missouri. And the head of the Chamber of Commerce, Rob O'Brien, and Joplin realized this, and they went on a fundraising campaign, and they raised money from all over the country, and they established a fund, and that fund gave just enough for these businesses to be able to survive until the federal and state assistance was able to come on board. Recovery plans for local governments is really, really important. You probably have several communities in your service territory, and you need a recovery plan for every one of those communities. And a great way to do it is to do what are called tabletop simulations, and there are guides available for you to be able to conduct a tabletop exercise. So it's a simulation of a disaster, and learning by that instead of waiting until the disaster actually happens is infinitely better and easier. And I would highly encourage you to meet with your local governments and develop these tabletop simulations. Again, there are a wide variety of sources that can provide you with that information and these some cell kits that are intended, to simulate the disaster, not literally, but the the situation that occurs in a disaster. That's so important. And again, workforce adaptability, having an adaptable workforce is so important. So retraining programs, dislocation funds. Uh, Again, we really have to be careful about naming specific agencies because we're just not sure right now which will still be around. But certainly, you and working with your business community could develop an adaptability based program to show workers how they can adapt to economic changes, to social economic changes, to changes in the layout of the business community. Those are also really, really important. Next slide. So, promoting a positive regional vision Disasters by their nature are negative events, right? Uh, so we want to put a positive take on how we prepare for those. So, you promote your strengths to attract investment. Everyone does that. You highlight assets and opportunities. You encourage proactive resilience measures. You encourage your communities. You encourage your business community to become very proactive in looking at where they have vulnerabilities, where they have weaknesses, and focusing on improving that by solving or at least addressing that weakness and making it less weak. And then frame shocks and as opportunities for reassessment. So there are two terms that are really important in resilience, and that's shocks and stresses. Shocks are, a hurricane or tornado or fire or whatever that may be. That's a shock. Uh, Stressors, that, however, are elements that are always around, and the degree in which those are the things like stressors are like having a workforce that's not really prepared and adaptable, not having really solid, resilient infrastructure. Those are stresses. They're always there, but when a shock occurs, those stresses are amplified. So you really want to address every component of your economy in looking at how to make it more resilient. Okay, next. So again, information, communication. Uh, Collaborating across sectors to share information, to mobilize support, to enhance preparedness, and also looking at what others have done. The Louisiana Business Emergency Operations Center in my home state, it's not in New Orleans, it's actually in Lafayette, to the west of New Orleans. Uh, the eight EDDs in Louisiana are engaged with this organization to provide real time communication during disasters and informing of programs and services that can help businesses prepare ahead of time. Which is, again, what you want to do is not wait till the disaster. You want to prepare now. And there are resources available from a variety of sources, not just the federal government. And the Louisiana Business Emergency Operations Center was actually established after Katrina with funds that were given by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Housing and Urban Development, and again, we aren't sure what will happen with that either. But Housing and Urban Development, after Katrina, uh, gave a waiver to allow disaster recovery funds to be utilized for economic recovery. And they call it HUD Disaster Recovery Funds. I'm sure some of you have heard of that. And they're quite substantial in most cases. But to get those funds, the jurisdiction that's affected, whether it's a city or a state or multiple states, has to prepare an action plan. So they want to know what you need, and what you're going to do with that. And it can be very detailed. The more detailed, the better chance of approval you will have. But it's an application process, it's an approval process, often takes a year or longer. So again, you want that for the long term, and that's again utilizing that to increase your economic resilience capacity. But in the meantime, you need to have steps in place that businesses can utilize to help them recover over the short term. Because again, that's when the vast majority of businesses that are lost in that short term. Next. So pre-disaster recovery planning is, I have a dear friend who's very well versed in disaster preparedness, and he calls it pre-covery, because you want to be ready for recovery before the disaster ever comes. And so developing comprehensive strategies to align economic development with hazard mitigation, to prioritize major employers for quick recovery, support local procurement and hiring during recovery. That's one area that for years was overlooked. There were in Louisiana, a state like Louisiana, if any of you from Florida or you're from California, the vulnerable states, Texas, they really when they receive major funds for recovery, there should be local businesses that have been trained in that form of procurement to be able to compete for those funds. Because the worst thing, and this happened after Katrina, a lot of smaller businesses were struggling to survive in all areas, not just construction, but services, goods, and large companies were coming in that were headquartered somewhere else, and were taking all of the contracting business. So in Louisiana, they established a procurement center, a technical procurement center specifically for disaster recovery operations. And it's located, again, to the west of New Orleans. But what it does is it trains small business owners and operators how to compete for these recovery contracts, because, again, often they're multi-year and they're large. Why not keep that money at home? I know you've all heard of the term economic leakage. And that's usually associated with importing a lot that could be assembled or made locally. This is the same principle, absolutely the same. Again, I gave you a link to the Coastal Procurement Assistance Center. And again, as you probably all have heard, Louisiana has a crisis. Its coastline losing about 3 football fields a day of wetland, and major billions of dollars. A lot of it came from the BP oil spill. Is being used to try to restore and protect the coast, the wetlands, and that center trains contractors for that as well. So again, there may be large projects going on that are either making the place more resilient or are in recovery efforts, and your local businesses need to be well aware of that. Next. So there are components and then there are practices. And components include diversifying industries to stable regional economies. That goes without saying. And cluster-based development is a great way to do that. And EDA, as you know, has fully embraced cluster-based economic development, where you're focusing on industry clusters that are like or similar, have similar inputs and outputs. Often these companies work together and have interfirm collaboration with each other, which is great. It's just a way to ensure that your industries are not left behind. And use FEMA Building Science Disaster Impact Program. That is a way to track business data, assess impacts. I don't know, again, we don't know how many of these programs will still be around, but it's around now, and it's a really very robust program. And then again, supporting workforce adaptability, those are components. Practices are the things that you do to increase resilience. One thing is avoiding floodplain development. It's just amazing to see how many development projects occur, especially housing development in floodplains. I did a land use plan for a county, as of course we call them parishes, a parish between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where subdivision builders weren't even paving the streets. They were just building these subdivisions, and sewer was running out. And we all talk about not having too many rules, and I agree with that. But we do need some rules so that to prevent things like that from happening. Um, Preserving natural buffers. Nature-based solutions are now the most popular form of resilience. Things like planting mangrove trees in areas that are subject to coastal erosion and tropical storms. Planting coral, because coral is a natural barrier that can reduce the impacts of disasters. But there are many, many more nature-based solutions, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with any of you that would like to talk about that at the office hour, because it's really becoming extremely popular, and does work. It does work. Protecting critical infrastructure. The Army Corps of Engineers has a special unit that focuses on what is called critical infrastructure. And it's what you would think. It's water and sewer, of course. It's electricity, of course. But it's also telecommunication, whether it's broadband or not. That's all extremely important to preserve. And we don't want to leave anyone out, but at some point we do have to prioritize. And believe me, Hurricane Katrina. This is a good example that I use a lot, because Hurricane Katrina did $160 billion worth of total impact. In response to Katrina, and the entire city was flooded. The city's below sea level, so the water had nowhere to go, and it was beyond a disaster. So the Army Corps of Engineers in the state built a flood protection system that circles the city. In some places, it's 3 stories high. And that cost $17 billion. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, 17 billion, that's too much. Well, on the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, on the day, August 29th, Hurricane Ida came to New Orleans. And Katrina did not make a direct hit on New Orleans. It hit to the east of New Orleans, along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. New Orleans was flooded because of the storm surge that accompanied that hurricane, which was massive. Again, non-resilient infrastructure. The levees gave way, the dams around the city gave way, and the entire city flooded. So they've spent 17 billion. Hurricane Ida comes. It makes a direct hit on New Orleans, similar in size and strength. It completely wiped out the electric grid, which is another story. If you want to hear about the electric grid and how that came to be a 40% rate increase for everyone in New Orleans. I can tell you about that. But anyway, the damage is the total negative impact of Ida was 100 billion. A lot of that was due to the electric failure, and all of the deaths from Ida were not drowning; they were heat exhaustion, because it was so blazing hot in the weeks after that hurricane. A lot of older and more vulnerable people perished, but not nearly the number of Katrina. Just a little over 100 for Ida, and it was 1,100 for Katrina. But that is so important when you look at what is the most critical thing and you look at how can you protect that. So that $17 billion investment reduced the damages of Ida by 60 billion compared to Katrina. So it's not this simple. The math's not this simple, but basically a $17 billion investment saves $60 billion in negative impacts. So that's the value of investing in resilience. And more communities are becoming attuned to this. More and more community, there's technology that can show how resilience measures can reduce damages. That's a net return to the community and to the businesses in the community. So, this is evolving and it needs to evolve quickly. The sad fact is that only 5% of global climate investment goes toward resilience. 5%. The rest go toward, the other things that you think about. So, we got a long way to go and we better get working right away. And again, I think we have to really think about who can we bring to the table? Who has resources? Who has a vested interest in making places more resilient? Well, certainly the insurance industry does, the banking industry does. Local industry certainly doesn't want severe disruption. So those are the things that we need to be talking about with our elected officials, with our appointed officials, with the business community, and with the community as a whole. Next slide. So recovery strategies really should uh, define the roles and responsibilities first and foremost. Prioritize actions for community recovery. And that's going to vary by community, by the type of disaster, by the amount of impact that it has. So it's something that you can't just set in a mold. It has to be flexible. You have to have that agility, and to have that agility, you have to have deep, strong trust and relationships, which are so critical again to all of this. It certainly should integrate with regional economic development goals and focusing again in integrating resilience throughout the recovery process, not just the response, but throughout it. An example is the Oklahoma Resilient Recovery. The Capital Area Economic Development District supported this effort. That's a link to the recovery manual, and it was widely known as the first time that recovery and resilience were uh, blatantly brought together. Generally, of course, you always want to do better when you recover, but this really put a spotlight on that. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. It's designated as a best practice by FEMA. Next. So EDDs should lead efforts to coordinate recovery initiatives, serve as data hubs for economic resilience. You're a natural convener. You're a natural regional organization that could serve that role and liaise with federal, state, and local agencies. And one reason that the National Disaster Recovery Framework was created under the Obama administration was the abject failure of agencies to coordinate themselves, work together after Katrina. And that's what led to the National Disaster Recovery Framework. And the framework's not that complicated. It organizes disaster recovery, long term recovery, and resilience in one of 6 different areas. So there's economic, and of course, Economic Development Administration is the lead agency, but there are 11 others under that. There's infrastructure, that's the Army Corps of Engineers. There's health, that's Health and Human Services. There's community planning and capacity building. They call it now community service, and that's actually done by FEMA. And there's natural and cultural resources, and that's led by the Department of the Interior. And all of these agencies are supposed to work in consort and work together, and most of the time they do pretty well. Who knows what will happen again in the future, but uh, so far they've tightened it up a little bit in the last couple of years. They've improved some of the information flows, et cetera, which is a good thing. So we'll see what happens there. Uh, my best practice is a great organization. It's in the suburbs of Sacramento. It's north of Sacramento, California. The Yuba Sutter, two counties. As many of you know, California's counties are as big as some states. So there are single county EDDs in California. Anyway, they had a very robust SEDS resilient effort. They really addressed workforce, housing, supply chain, healthcare, and others. And that's the strategy link. Great people. And I'd encourage you to reach out to them. They're more than happy to share their experience and how they've utilized that to make their region more resilient. Next. And this is planning 101, but it's essential. An action plan is the heart of the SEDS. We all know that. The resilience action plan should be inserted into the overall SEDS action plan. And the resilience action plan should include identification of vulnerabilities in the region, clear resilience goals, measurable objectives, and actionable projects to address identified weaknesses. And it's all about action. Action is at the core of the SEDS action plan, and it should be at the core of the resilience component as well. And what steps? It's all about who's going to do what by when, what resources are needed, and where do we get those resources. So it's the old who, what, where, when. And it's actually worked extremely well in numerous organizations that have taken on the resilience mantle. Next. So, how do you measure economic resilience? There's economic diversity in Appalachia is measured by a tool that they just developed for industry analysis, and there are both public organizations, agencies that do this. FEMA has its own resilience index. I mentioned that earlier. And then Argonne National Labs National Economic Resilience Data Explorer, which is a great tool, and Economic Development Capacity Index are both really robust ways to assess how resilient your economy is, look for where there are weaknesses, and then again, take those actions, secure the resources to be able to address them. And again, you can benchmark your data against national averages, which are again published by a variety of organizations. Um, Again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We have to admit that up front. But certainly there will still be data and information available for you to measure your progress. Next. So here are some resilient recovery tools. The cost benefit analysis tool is really great because it's required if you are applying for funds under the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. But you should use it anyway because it can show you which resilience investments will provide the greatest return in terms of reduction of damages. It's not that hard to use. If I can use it, anyone can use it. It's really a very useful tool. The National Hazard Risk Assessment Program, or HAZUS, that's a really great tool to look at your risk of two different natural hazards. The Recovery Resilience Resource Library, and then Risk Map, which is a GIS-based multi-hazard risk estimating tool. That can also really give you a pinpoint exactly where you have the most weaknesses. It can really help you with that. It's GIS based; it covers the entire country. So please, go online as soon as you can and get to know these tools. And again, I think they'll still be around in one form or another. Next, here's some other resources. Of course, IEDC, which is the Economic Development Organization Association. They have a really great, so it's separate web address, and it has tools and resources. The Business Emergency Operations Center Guide for Business Recovery. I would highly encourage you to check that out and check out and look at the possibility, if you don't have one, of establishing Business Emergency Operations Center. It's not a huge investment. It's a communications center basically, and you probably have capacity in your organization's facilities right now for something like that. It's it's set up on an as needed basis, so you don't have to have a permanent staff or anything like that. But it's great to have the framework that you can utilize to keep your businesses informed. And then, of course, Brett already beat me to the punch, Brett, but the said Central Resilience page is really good. It's very thorough, and it's designed, of course, for EDDs. So you would think that it would be. There's another thing that I want to bring up, and we can have that. We can go ahead to the last slide. Uh, we have a extensive body of knowledge on what is called business continuity. And it's confusing because that term is a technical term, but it's really business resilience. It's really businesses making a plan in case of a disaster so that they will know what they need to do, when they need to do it, who they need to have with them as far as their key employees, their key staff members, what steps do they need to take, both in preparation for a disaster and especially after a disaster. And this discipline has tremendous resources. And Brett, I want to make a correction before, if we do this again, and add business continuity because it's so important. Let me give you an example of a number of businesses in Katrina were damaged severely because they lost their records. And in order to get any type of assistance, if you're a business, you have to have records. And a lot of those businesses, smaller businesses, and the thing that we realize in evaluating what happened to these businesses is there was one, very, very complex and very costly thing that about half of them could have done that would have saved them that misery. Lift your computer off the floor. These people were in New Orleans with businesses. Now, I'm not saying there's any fault on their part, but they just didn't think that anything like that would happen. So they left their CPUs on the floor. Of course, everyone has laptops now. I don't know that would even be an issue, but at that time it was. So having a plan and taking into account those things that we often don't think about, that we need to think about, is so critically important. And FEMA has great resources on business continuity. Your businesses in your region can get the resources they need, the instructions they need, the information they need to be able to make themselves more resilient by utilizing business continuity planning. So please, and I'm happy to discuss that at length, also in the office hours. So, in conclusion, we know that disasters are going to continue. They're going to continue, and they're going to continue to increase. It's just a fact. And we will certainly see more and more, major threats. Again, both from the weather, but also from these other destabilizing events that are going to occur. So we really need to, focus, and especially because you have resilience in your SEDS, focus on those actions. Focus on communication, relationships, developing those relationships, those channels of communication, so that you are able to respond more quickly and you're able to recover more thoroughly. And incorporating, as you know, is crucial. I think the SEDS manual has 28 pages, and I think 10 of those are just about the resilience component of the SEDS. That's how much importance certainly EDA puts on it. And I have a personal story. I again worked very closely with a lot of people. Thought I was an employee of a planning and development district in North Louisiana, and the founder of that, he founded it in 1967 and ran it until 2017. He made a decision that they had a big summit every 2 years. At the summit in 2016 was going to be on resilience. So he bought little rubber deer, and they had big eyes, and he called it deer in the headlights. Don't be a deer in the headlights. And I didn't realize it at the time because he was a very private person, but he had been diagnosed with very severe heart disease. And that summit was the last major event that he held before he passed away, and it's always stuck with me. So don't be a deer in the headlights, guys. Be prepared. Be ready. Preparedness is really, really the fundamental foundation of especially economic resilience. So that's where I am, and happy to take any questions from anyone. No questions?
Oh, there we are. Sorry, David. All
That's
right. Well,
okay.
yeah, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, wonderful presentation. Every time I hear you speak, I learn something new. So really appreciate you taking the time to craft this really kind of valuable and timely presentation for us. So yeah, I want to encourage folks to drop any questions you have in the chat. And of course, whoever's interested, love for you to come back on Thursday and kind of have a little more of an informal discussion. But any kind of direct responses or questions for the presentation today, would love to see those. And while folks are getting their thoughts together, David, I just love to hear kind of like big picture. And you mentioned 20 disaster recovery projects over your career. Just thinking big picture, if there's kind of one or two things that you saw in places that were, quote unquote, successful in their recovery, kind of what was the secret sauce there? And then places that you saw maybe stumbled or struggled a little bit, what did they do or not do really? So just kind of looking big picture, what are some of those kind of key takeaways from again, 2 decades?
I'm not even going to name the state, because if I name the state, the people will know where I'm talking about. But there were two communities that were both uh, badly damaged by a massive tornado, and they were about 20 miles apart. And one in the first community, the mayor was very engaged with the citizens. They held town hall meetings for people to talk about what's happened to them and what could be done to prevent that from happening again. And they really did a fantastic job of making themselves more economically resilient through that recovery. The other had a mayor who was uh, closed closed off. The mayor and the council didn't. I mean, anyone's free to come to a council meeting. I mean, that's obvious, but they didn't have anything specifically to address the concerns after the disaster. And that community really did not do well in its recovery. And it's all about that, Brett. It's all about the relationships and the communication and engaging and involving the people in the region, the leaders, and the citizens, the stakeholders. You know, we call them victims. I'm an indirect victim of disaster. I've told you this story, but there may be some people that don't know it. Um, I was I was in Puerto Rico recovery, which took 5 years. Why did it take 5 years? Because the power grid was completely destroyed. They had to completely rebuild the power grid. And in that process, a lot of businesses, which were struggling anyway, the economy was already struggling, uh, were teetering on the edge of going under. And we tried to save as many as we could. We implemented some really, and we were involved in the development of the EDD, and you were a part of a little bit of that, Brett. Thank you. And during that process, instead of staying a year, which normally is about as long as we would ever stay, we had to stay 5 years. Well, in the third of those 5 years, I contracted a deadly bacteria into my bloodstream, and I lost my left leg. So I am an indirect victim of lack of resilience. And it's not for anyone to feel for me. I'm, as you know, I do fine, but I certainly think about, I think about other people. How many other people that were harmed or had something happen terribly to them, and especially business owners, small business people that spend their lives building an enterprise, and to see it all go away, it's heartbreaking. It's crushing. So I think that as leaders of EDDs, you guys have a responsibility. And I know enough of you, I've met enough of you and have been around EDD so long. I know you guys all take that very seriously. And it's critical. And again, I know there are some, fairly large economic development organizations that aren't EDDs, the EDOs, but you guys are the foundation. You just are. You said it, Brett. You're the convener, and you have the leadership of your communities at the table. And please, please, if you have any questions about anything, I told Brett that this is not a one-off deal for me. I'm around as long as you have a question. I'm here, and Brett knows this. I'm single and I live alone, so I'm not ever tied up with anything else.
Well, we're
Always have time. I always have time, or I'll make time.
absolutely
That's my truth.
beautifully said. Well, David, thanks so much. And yeah, we're certainly grateful for all of your support, and you're just a living testament to the value and impact of this work. A few questions have come through in the interim, and we've carved out, some extra time till half past to get through these. So keep them coming if you've got some more questions. But excellent question from Candace. Asking, would or could you use the SEDS committee as that task force for information network, or would you suggest another group of people? So any models that you've seen, David, on kind of who that kind of best cohort is to really kind of dive deep into these issues?
Yeah, the SEDS committee in Yuba Sutter, the SEDS committee did do that. They were the committee that was the SEDS had already been done. This was an addendum to the SEDS, um, and they used that same committee as the convening committee. So I don't think it depends on your organization. You know, I've never seen two EDDs that were exactly alike. So I think it depends on the makeup of your organization, who's involved in the SEDS committee. Are they the people that would naturally be at the table? Then sure, why not?
Great. So another question came in from Lucas here, David, who asks, are there any specialized resources out there to fund or provide assistance to emergency disaster relief activities prior to the disbursement of FEMA funds or even prior to the declaration of a federal disaster?
The short answer is no. And that's why it is so important for EDDs to be the leader in establishing an emergency fund. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. I mean, you could get by at a regional basis. You know, if you had $100,000 in a fund, you know, you're going to have a certain number of businesses that are going to be critically impacted, and those are the ones. And my friend Michael Hecht, who runs the big EDO down here in New Orleans, he came up with this after 9/11. He was involved in recovery from 9/11. He called it the triage system, just like on the battlefield. There are some businesses that no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to save them, unfortunately. There are some businesses that they may limp for a while, but they'll be okay. It's those in the middle, those that are not destroyed, but that will go out of business if they don't get help. And that varies by disaster. You know, again, no two disasters are alike, no two communities are alike. But if you can have just some funds set aside, maybe you can work with your financial institutions. What they did in Louisiana after massive floods in 2016 is they got the foundations, all of the community foundations throughout the state, and other foundations that were based in Louisiana, and they had them agree to provide loans, not grants, loans to businesses that could utilize that funding to help them stay afloat. And I think I can't remember the amount, Brett, but I think it was a couple $100,000. So I mean, this is, you know, there are resources. You know, there may be wealthy individuals that would be willing to do something along those lines just to help. And you never know until you ask.
Yeah, David, there's a quick follow-up from Mary on that one about the fund. You know, would it be created at an EDD? Would you ask businesses to pay in? Just kind of, as you mentioned, how do you kind of resource
There,
that fund?
there are a wide variety of ways to do that. It just depends on what's best for your region. Um, in in uh, in in Joplin, they set up a separate NGO, a 501c3, when they did that recovery from the tornado that destroyed the whole town. So that, you know, it just depends on what works for you, what works for your leadership, what you're comfortable with. You know, a lot of EDDs, you know, have RLFs. If you have a revolving loan fund already, then you have the capacity to do that. And you know, a lot of you guys have staff that maybe have financial background that could administer something like that. You certainly need, and I do have access to some of the through Rob O'Brien, who you know, Brett. Rob would be happy to share, you know, how they structured theirs with anybody. He's happy to do that.
Excellent. Thanks so much, David. And Candace, appreciate you putting in the chat here about the loan fund with low interest rates. So yeah, Candace, if you're willing to share your information there with the group, if any folks want to reach out, want to keep that conversation going. If anyone has any final questions, please drop them in. I guess one more I had for you, David, was on the tabletop simulations, which you mentioned is a really
Yeah,
kind of wonderful opportunity to kind of get that experience and build those relationships. And you mentioned a few, there's lots of resources out there to do that. But what do you think, what do you see in a good tabletop demonstration that folks kind of walk away from, really feeling confident or prepared for? What's kind of the sign of
yeah.
a
Well, you know, they and again, I don't want to talk about consultants or anything like that. There are consultants that do that, but you could get the resources you need, and all you have to do is do a Google search, look for tabletop disaster simulation. You'll be overwhelmed. And the best ones really, really, it sounds a little silly to say this, but they get in the best ones are where you are actually simulating an actual disaster. And I had one group that turned out all the lights like they didn't have any power. They're trying to do this tabletop exercise with flashlights in their offices. But I mean, it sounds silly, but that's what can happen, right? And so simulating as closely as you can. And they have these maps that have the community, and you can show where the damages were occurred, where facilities were damaged, where businesses were damaged. You can simulate that entire process. And it's really meant to train for response. But in doing that, you're going to necessarily see where you have weaknesses, looking at recovery and resilience. So to me, that's a great tool. It really is.
Excellent. Well, David, I think we'll wrap things up now. I just, on behalf of the group, just big thanks for this presentation, all you've done, for communities and districts, and again, really knowing kind of our audience here and the role that they can play in preparedness. So big appreciation to you for that, and hope folks can join us again on Thursday. It'll kind of be
Yeah,
similar like this, but we're going to have our
it's going to be
cameras on.
informal.
Yeah,
Right.
we'll have cameras on, just a chance to share kind of what you're be going through locally. If you have any questions specific to your community, or just to be able to have a place to kind of meet and join other folks that are also going through either recurrent, recovery issues in real time, which I know many of you
Yeah.
are, and we're certainly sending our best in support. And also for those of you who are just trying to prepare for what lies ahead. So hope to
I
see you
want
all
to
on
flag
Thursday.
something. I want to
Yeah,
flag
go
something
ahead,
before we go.
please.
One of the participants put up a message and said some basic National Incident Management System
Yep.
(NIMS) training would be good for anyone, and I could not agree more. Because again, that is tied. That's tied to resilience. The response effort is tied to long-term resilience and recovery. So I would highly encourage. It's available, all over the nation, and it's really good. It shows you what the responders, what they have to do, and that helps inform your decisions about resilience, right, and recovery. So great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, Craig, thanks for dropping that in the chat. So with that, I think David will let you get back to Mardi Gras festivities. Again,
Music. I don't
appreciate.
know if you guys heard it, but the music started getting louder and louder, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, they're gonna kill me."
That's great. It's all part of the fun, and glad they're still celebrating in New Orleans. And yeah, folks, there'll be a quick 5-question survey that'll pop up on the screen afterwards. So please take a moment to fill it out, especially on kind of what topics and themes you would like to explore going forward. We're really trying to be responsive to your needs, whether it's around these issues of resilience or disaster recovery and preparedness, or any issues related to your work at the EDDs. That's what we're here for with the community of practice. So take a moment to fill that out. Again, big thank you, David, for taking the time. Excited to see you on Thursday, and many of you all for a continuing conversation.
Yeah, please come back,
That's
guys.
it.
Please come back. Bring someone with you. I like skeptics. Just bring someone that doesn't believe in any of this.
But we'll have a good conversation either way. And
Yeah.
yeah, folks, be in touch, and have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you soon. Thanks again, David.
Thanks, everyone.
Be
Thanks so
well.
much, Brett.
Bye-bye.
Bye.